Good morning. Welcome to Propelify's Better Planet Day. I am so excited for this session. As you may have heard over the last many months, we've had a major focus around clean tech. We're giving away later today a $50,000 cash prize along with a whole host of other things for our Clean Tech Impact Challenge. That's been graciously supported by PSEG. We have today Ralph Izzo, the CEO of PSEG, joining us. Really appreciate that. Thanks for being here, Ralph.
My pleasure.
And Ralph's going to have a conversation with Paula Glover, who's the president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. Paula, nice to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to hand it over to you guys right now, and I'll be back in a little bit, but really appreciate you being here on today's Better Planet Day.
Sure.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Thank you. So Ralph, good to see you. And I am looking forward to this discussion. So we're going to hop right on in and see how much we can cover in our short time frame, because there's a lot happening, as you know, in our business.
Absolutely.
So let's start with not necessarily the most important issue, but certainly one of the most critical ones that we've been dealing with probably over the last 5 years or so, and more recently very focused on, which is climate change. We know, and most of us agree, that that's one of the greatest threats to our planet is climate change. Any solution that has any kind of substantial mitigation is going to require that everyone in the world, worldwide application, we all need to be involved. We all have a place in this, and that some countries are better positioned to invest in clean energy resources and technologies than others. And so my question to you is kind of a 2 to 3-parter. From where you sit as the CEO of PSEG, an investor-owned utility, as a scientist, even more importantly, are we approaching climate mitigation correctly? Are we doing it the right way when we target just specific energy resources, or should policymakers also be focused on clean energy technology and other solutions? So tell us, if you were able to write the playbook, how would you do that?
So unfortunately, Paul, I don't think we're approaching it the right way. There are entities that are trying very hard, and I give them a lot of credit for trying very hard. But what we're missing is national leadership on the subject. We've articulated a 5-point plan that we think would go a long way towards mitigating climate change. Step number 1 is to put a price on carbon. And I don't want to bore you with the details, but that could be a variety of different ways. But once you have a clear cost associated with carbon, and you can use the National Academy of Sciences seminal research on it, or a variety of other studies, then what that sets you up to do is to make intelligent choices as to which of the next 4 steps you would apply where. The first step, that's been proven time and time again to be the most cost effective, is energy efficiency. So with the price on carbon, people will be more efficient as to how they use fuels that produce carbon, whether it's in their vehicle, or whether it's in their electricity, or whether it's in their home heating, or whatever way in which they emit carbon. But energy efficiency would be choice number 1. Choice number 2 would be the preservation of the existing nuclear fleet. I'm not suggesting that we would build new nuclear plants, but I am suggesting that the current fleet of nuclear power plants are responsible for 20% of the nation's energy and 50% of its carbon-free electricity. Third, then, would be investing in renewables in the right place where we maximize our environmental dollars. In some places, that would be grid-connected solar. In other places, it would be onshore wind. In other places, it might be offshore wind. And once you've done all of that, once you've set this economy-wide price on carbon, and you've really cleaned up the electric supply options through energy efficiency, existing nuclear and renewables, then you could proceed to electrify the entire economy, because you'd have this clean energy source in the form of carbon-free electricity that you could apply first and foremost to transportation, but subsequently to other areas as well. But we're so far removed from that right now. We have this patchwork quilt of states setting different prices on carbon, choosing different technologies that they want to make use of, picking winners and losers, and it results in some very strange economic decisions being made across the country.
So let me ask you a follow-up, and this is not, part of what I submitted, but I don't think it's a difficult question for you to answer, which is at this point in time, given kind of where you are, what would be your suggestion on how do we move forward? Because we do have a patchwork. We do have a patchwork, and unfortunately, we do even have some folks who actually don't think that climate is as critical a problem as that, certainly as I personally feel it is. So what do we do now, given kind of the situation we're in?
I'll answer that question directly, but first let me just give a little preface.
Sure.
There's a field of mathematics called probability theory, and it basically says the expected value is equal to the probability of event times the size of that event. So in my mind, if you're a naysayer on climate and you don't think it's likely that anthropogenic causes are bringing about these changes, and you put a low probability on climate change, still the magnitude of the impact is something that we're seeing every day. In fact, climate change is responsible for California fires, East Coast hurricanes, sea level rise resulting from the melting of ice sheets in Greenland. So even if you take this small probability and you multiply it by the catastrophic consequences associated with climate change, you should be motivated to take action. Now, to your question, what would that action look like? If you don't like taxes, then do cap and trade. If you don't like increased cost to consumers via taxes or cap and trade, take the revenue from that and dividend it back to fill in the blank. Is it businesses that are hurt by unfair trade practices? Is it low-income populations who can't afford to pay for consumer goods today? So there's no shortage of ways to recycle the money that comes from a price on carbon into ways that I think reasonable people can agree to compromise on. But the key indicator is to send a signal to entrepreneurs, to consumers, that emitting carbon is not a free ride. And right now, emitting carbon in many places is a free ride. So that's what I would do. I would simply say, let's put aside what we're going to do with the money that comes from this. And let's recognize that the most important thing we should do is send a signal that no matter how low or how high the probability is, the consequences are disastrous. So therefore, the expected value is something we cannot ignore.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So let's talk a little bit more about climate change and energy efficiency. And as you noted in your response, right, the first is the price on carbon. The second is energy efficiency as a solution. Energy efficiency is one of those things that's near and dear to my heart because I think about customers all the time, and using none is always better than using a little bit. And so as we think about the discussions that have happened around climate change, it seems to me that energy efficiency often isn't part of that conversation. I think that's a mistake. And at the same time, many folks have identified energy efficiency as the least expensive and most effective means to reverse climate warming trends, which is what you just alluded to. So I wonder if you have any thoughts as to why energy efficiency hasn't been a larger part of this discussion. And what impact could energy efficiency have, effective energy efficiency have in our ability to reverse some of the climate issues that we see today?
I think that there are many reasons why it hasn't gotten the attention it should get. Some of them are kind of sad reasons, others are a lot more rational. One of the sad reasons is it's just nice for policymakers to do groundbreaking ceremonies at big solar farms. It's hard to do a photo op at a thermostat or an LED bulb. But I don't think that's the main reason. I think the reality is most folks believe in policy circles that absent absent government intrusion, we won't get wind and we won't get solar. And big solutions, right, to this problem. They are installed at megawatts at a time. So therefore, policymakers get active in helping to make that a reality. So you've seen production tax credits, investment tax credits, renewable portfolio standards, and a zillion other ways to motivate that. But think about what we said a moment ago, Paula. Energy efficiency can be done and save money. Well, I don't need to motivate that. I don't need to incent that. I mean, it's a consumer choice. Consumers should be happy to save money. But that fails to recognize the many market imperfections that get in the way of energy efficiency. Some of those market imperfections are well known. They are everything from agency issues. I'm a renter. I pay my rent, my energy bill is inside my rent. What motivation do I have to reduce costs? I'm a first-time home buyer. If I'm going to sell that home later on, I'm not going to sell it on the basis of an efficient thermostat or air conditioning system. I'm going to sell it on the basis of beautiful kitchen cabinets. University president, I'm not going to attract top flight talent by having the lowest amount of kilowatt hours per square foot on a campus. I'm going to attract people by having the best laboratories in existence. So there are all kinds of market imperfections that get in the way of energy efficiency that need policymakers' attention as much as those other projects. I'm delighted to say that in New Jersey, we've actually made those decisions. And in fact, just last week, we received approval for a $1 billion investment over the next 3 years in energy efficiency. That $1 billion investment is expected to produce over $2 billion of energy savings. So the net savings will be a little over $1 billion. And we're going to take 8 million tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. So we're going to save money and we're going to remove carbon. That's a negative price of removing carbon.
Right.
That's just a wonderful outcome. And you know, the estimates vary as to how much that we could do nationwide. I've heard numbers as high as 18% of our carbon mitigation targets can be achieved by energy efficiency alone. But a lot depends on whether or not you're going to limit yourself to a negative cost of carbon removal, i.e. saving money while reducing carbon, or if you'd be willing to pay as much as some of the supply solutions are willing to pay. And candidly, some of the subsidies we pay for rooftop solar, as an example, are literally hundreds of dollars per ton of carbon. If you're willing to do that, then energy efficiency can have even more of an impact.
Sure. So let's stick with that a little bit. You know, and congratulations first on getting your approval for energy efficiency. A two-parter again, but I'll ask them actually separate. So the first is, right, in what way is energy efficiency dependent on technology? And is it dependent on technology?
So we have a lot of technology now that would provide for low-hanging fruit. It's variable speed drive motors, LED lighting, home energy management systems, smart thermostats, things of that nature. So there's plenty to do right now. And candidly, some of our housing stock is so old that even caulking windows would help. But part of this exciting partnership we have with Propelify is that we're stimulating some thought among entrepreneurs about things that can be done. And as Aaron may have mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at some finalists who have some pretty nifty ideas for how we can be even more efficient in terms of appliances and modifications to building envelopes. Again, if you let the market work, because there's a clear price signal that it's smarter to not emit carbon than it is to emit carbon, then you'll get all sorts of new technology that I can't even begin to dream up right now.
Yeah. So my follow-up would be, you know, one of the things that we as an association are always concerned about is the unintended consequences of the decisions and the policy decisions that we make. And certainly, as you laid out in the challenges around energy efficiency, it is that this idea of universal access, right? And whether or not you have either a home, and you're an adopter, but your home isn't going to meet the standards for kind of basic efficiency measures, whatever that is. How do we best avoid those kinds of inequities in energy efficiency so that all of our communities really do get the benefit, not just the economic benefit, but that our homes, et cetera, we're all participating in this process?
Yeah, I do think public policy is important, essential to assuring universal access. But the reality is we could have decided a century ago that the market will decide who gets electricity and who doesn't. It's a consumer good. It's not, you don't need it to live. Could have just simply said, well, if you want electricity, go out and buy some from your local provider. The reality is we would not have had universal access to electricity. And policymakers have decided for decades that there are certain things, telephony, heating in the home, electricity in the home, that they wanted to make sure that universal access was a hallmark of utility operations. And candidly, that involves some cross-subsidization, and I think it's completely justified. We haven't done that with energy efficiency. We've done crazy things like grant programs, where literally if you go and buy an efficient appliance, you will get a check, a rebate check from either your state government or your local utility. Well, oftentimes that rebate check goes to people who already have high amount of disposable income, because they're the ones who can pay the upfront capital costs for that highly efficient air conditioner or refrigeration unit. Well, who pays them that rebate check? The customers who could not take advantage of that. Customers who are having to buy the lowest cost solution because they don't have disposable income. So we've gone to New Jersey regulators and say, that's not right. That's not fair. It's regressive and it makes no sense. Use us as a regulated utility to direct, yes, the subsidy, to make sure that people are motivated to participate in the program. So that's why we're directing our programs towards hospitals, low income customers, municipal government buildings, so that it's either someone who can't afford to pay or a customer who benefits everyone. So that $1 billion in net savings isn't realized evenly. Program participants save $17 a month. Non-participants pay $1 a month. But it's a progressive way to make these decisions. It's not regressive. It's not going to benefit those who could afford to do it on their own. So for those who can afford to do it on their own, the market will work for them. They'll go out and make those decisions and they'll save money without being subsidized by those who can't afford it. But the short answer to your question is the hallmark of utilities is universal access. And we have a low cost of capital, so the subsidies cost us very little on a relative scale. And they do provide a net benefit to society overall. So I would emphasize social justice issues by having the utilities be responsible for universal access.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate, your leadership at PSEG, and certainly in my mind, in my opinion, what you've laid out really is a great example of what equity looks like in terms of meeting customers where they are, not exactly where we need to be, and then giving everybody the same thing and trying to figure out who's going to keep up. So let's continue the conversation about equity, because energy is becoming far more technology driven. We can talk about energy efficiency, EVs, charging infrastructure, et cetera. How do we kind of avoid an energy divide like we saw with the digital divide? How are we going to make up, and can we make up the gaps that already exist, again, to get to this universal access that you've described?
So in energy efficiency, I think it's easier, let me just say, by virtue of directing to the customer groups that could most benefit from the reduced bill. In the case of large-scale supply solutions, then it's a little bit tougher, right? Because what you want to do in that case, I believe, is have it grid connected. So at the very least, even though everyone is paying into it, low income as well as high income, the benefits are equally distributed because it's connected to the grid as opposed to on my rooftop.
Gotcha.
This year, for example, New Jersey's going to spend, and as they have the past 2 years, $600 million in subsidies for rooftop solar. Yet the average rooftop solar owner is earning about $100,000 to $120,000 per year. That's much higher than the average homeowner in New Jersey and much higher than the average American. And both of them are subsidizing that rooftop solar system. Whereas if you do a grid connected system, then the power is going into the wholesale power market and benefiting everyone. And of course, better than anything would be community solar, where you specifically target lower income communities that might have not only difficulty paying their bills, but have the issue of less than perfect air quality because of whatever development has taken place in that region in the past. That is also going to require some heavy subsidization, which is why I would prefer to start with a price on carbon so that you make more rational economic decisions as opposed to saying, no, I insist upon having solar in a place where the sun doesn't shine much, or I insist upon having wind in a place where the wind shines a lot, but there are no people living there. So I think a price on carbon leads you to more rational decision making, and then you can overlay that with the lens on, okay, is this regressive or progressive? Is it maximizing my environmental dollar? Is it maximizing my my social justice dollar? And put those screens on top of it. We're not doing anything close to that nowadays.
Do you think that there is an opportunity to, or that policymakers are in a place that kind of messaging, as you've outlined it, right? I call it the siloing of solutions. We tend to silo our solutions to a specific problem and not think about the other things that are interconnected. Do you think we're in a place now where people are more ready to kind of see how these things are connected so that you come up with better outcomes?
You know, I think that there is some evidence that people see it, and I'm going to offer something that may seem off topic. Mm-hmm. I'm going to offer COVID-19. Mm-hmm. You know, this is something that has decimated human health. I think in the U.S. we're over 200,000 people who've died from the disease.
Yeah.
And it has demonstrated what happens when you have poor global orchestration of what is essentially a solvable problem. I'm not a medical expert, but based upon the credible medical experts I listen to, there are some basic human health steps that we can take to really mitigate the spread of this disease. But yet nations did not work together to do that. climate change is nowhere near, forgive me for using this word, as simple as COVID-19. Climate change is far more complex. And if we think for a second that there aren't implications for climate change that interrelate nation to nation, we are terribly kidding ourselves. So the need to have a concerted international effort with clear national leadership coming from those nations who can afford it, to your earlier question, we are sorely mistaken. And I'm hoping that COVID-19 points to that, the fact that no matter how hard we try, we are very much interconnected with other nations. And we cannot pretend to go it alone with a nationalist policy and save ourselves from the problems that get created elsewhere. So will policymakers come to realize that? I think more of us are talking about it nowadays, and we're getting some nodding of heads.
That's good. So we have limited time, but I want to talk a little bit about, I think, what is the topic of the year, which is equity. And I think your example of COVID-19 is an excellent one of showing us, I think, as a country, where our inequities among communities existed, and how we would see them individually, but COVID really kind of laid it out like, oh, there are all these different places that the inequities exist. And so as we've been talking through the summer about equity for African Americans in particular, as that relates to criminal justice, access to capital, employment, et cetera, what I think you would agree, I suspect, is that our industry, the energy industry broadly, right, has not led on issues around racial equity or social justice. That typically has not felt like it's a place. And that over this summer, we've seen a lot of African Americans move into C-suite positions. We also know that there's a lot more that should be done, I believe. Last week, we heard a report of a CEO in another sector, another industry, who talked about a lack of African American talent being the challenge and the problem. That's a contention I would personally disagree with. That's not for you to respond to. My question is, what should the energy, the clean energy industry, the clean tech industry do? What should we be doing differently so that we are attracting, identifying, and retaining African Americans and other diverse talent in our business moving forward, particularly those to be in leadership positions?
So excellent question. And as you know, there's no one simple answer to it. It's a whole host of things. So at PSEG, we had for many, many years basically taken the position, we are responsible for safe, reliable, adequate service, and we're not going to get involved in major social policy issues. We broke with that. We realized that silence means that you're part of the problem and you need to be part of the solution. So we've made major investments in social justice organizations because they are better at spending that money to help make sure that some of the broader social issues are addressed in terms of systemic racism and things of that nature. But as a company specifically, we've done a variety of things. We have programs now around diversity and inclusion action plans for our leadership. I literally read 350 pages of specific action plans among our top 250 employees and what they plan to do differently, to your point, Paula, to attract, retain, and make our workplace a vibrant place for everyone. To not tolerate diversity, but to celebrate and value and respect diversity, and realize that it's those combination of different backgrounds that give us better solutions to the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. We've changed some of our recruiting practices. We now go to historically Black colleges and universities to attract talented engineers. And I'm delighted to say, by the way, when we show up, we're not showing up alone. We're doing battle with Google and Microsoft and a variety of really top flight companies. So I think other industries are onto this as well. We've had a series of forums that have occurred over virtual through Zoom and other virtual workshops called Relevant Conversations, where we've asked people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community, people who work with physical disabilities, to talk about what has my life been like? How has this aspect of me been an influence on the workplace and how I've been received? There are two trends that public policy will do nothing about. It's the inexorable march of technology and shifting demographics. If PSEG is going to be a successful company in the next 100 years, we have to embrace both of those and recognize that the labor pool, the supply chain pool, the entrepreneurial pool, the consultant pool, you name it, is going to look very different than what it was 100 years ago. And we want that pool to say, I want to do business with that company. We have to be welcoming, we have to be embracing, we have to be all in. And we do that in a variety of different ways that I just tried to articulate.
So my very last question is this. So, because this is an innovation event. So what innovations are you most impressed with in the industry today, or what are you looking forward to seeing, even from those who are competing and the winners that you're going to announce later on this week?
I'd say that there are two. I do believe that the digitization of the energy industry is just beginning. It started at our most valuable assets in our nuclear plants and in our gas plants and our power plants in general. And it's made its way into our high voltage bulk transmission system, but it has not gone anywhere near the customer yet. And I do think that with advances in automated meter reading and our ability to look at customer consumption patterns on a much more granular nature as opposed to reading them once a month, we'll be able to detect all sorts of imperfections and declines in customer appliances and help them, guess what? Replace them, be more efficient and save money on their bills. I'm looking forward to the complete digitization of the whole value chain from consumption all the way up to supply. And I think then separate and apart from that, I am looking forward to greater advances in storage technologies to help us make even better use of renewables. And I'm not just talking about batteries, I'm talking about hydrogen, I'm talking about compressed air energy storage and things of that nature. So those are the two categories that I think have some excitement in store for us in the future.
Okay, well, I think we are just about out of time. So thank you so much for all of that you've been able to share. I'm certainly, as a PSEG customer, I'm very excited to see what's ahead for you and the company.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
I'm so glad that Ralph, you brought up the idea of the digitization of the energy industry. Although you may have frozen there, so we might have a small problem for you to respond to this. But if it works, I want to be clear that Ralph, are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, we've got a good smiling fixed image of you. I'll ask you this question in a moment when we get you back in, right? But Paula, I do want to ask you a question.
Sure.
You deal with this industry nationally, and here he comes. You know, we're living in a time of quite a bit of unrest. And I was hoping you could help us end on a message of hope with what you're seeing in the industry. You know, what are you around the country? Are others as committed as PSEG? What are you hearing? And can you give us some positive, I mean, hopefully some message of positivity that we can all lean into?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I think others are committed. I think as an association, my association created an equity campaign, and we've had companies sign on and make commitments. And like Ralph, I think what is probably for me, the thing that's most heartening is that companies are making public commitments. They're not keeping quiet about their commitments. And that there's a risk involved, because if you don't miss the mark, you put yourself up for criticism. People are going to make mistakes. I think all of that is fine and to be expected. But when a company CEO steps up and says, this is what I'm prepared to do, A, and B, that I understand that this is an issue for me as a corporate leader, that this is not separate from my business, that's huge. And then in the 30 years that I've worked in this industry, it's the first time I've ever seen it. So there's a lot for us to really be positive about and hopeful for, and a lot for us to stay focused on.
Yeah, Ralph, before we had a technical difficulty, you were talking about the digitization of the energy industry. And you've heard me talk about looking for differentiated advantages that Tech United can provide to the technology community so we can stand out in the market. And I think this is such a critical point that you make, that PSEG is open for business. You're looking to lean in this direction. There are entrepreneurs who should be able to take advantage of this. We can improve society for people. Why is this such an important? I think others aren't taking as significant a leadership role. Why is this so important to you?
Well, I've always had a fascination with energy, and the nexus to climate change and to social justice issues is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And candidly, I see some significant economic dislocations coming our way. So if we don't start doing some of these things, the connection between energy, economy, and environment is so pronounced that I think we'd be missing a huge opportunity. Plus, what I would add to that, Aaron, is that the current generation of new employees, whether they high school graduates, college graduates, are so excited about climate change and battling it and technology and making sure that the information economy, whatever you want to call it, is a part of their life, that I think we have a whole new capability of folks who get excited to tackle these problems. And I want to keep them excited.
Absolutely agree. I can't thank you both enough for being with you today. It seems like there's this moment, timing is critical, certainly in the startup's life cycle, but in all industries. And it feels like we're in this moment where culturally, the talent, the workforce is interested in this. The capital is there. Government is, in many cases, supportive, maybe not universally, but there is momentum. We have the BPU commissioner, Diane Solomon, on our judging committee for the Startup Challenge. They're hugely excited about what might unfold here in New Jersey. So I really appreciate both of your commitment towards the innovation community, how we can play a larger role. Our theme, as you know, is building a better future for all. This damn better planet certainly touches that theme in a big way. So thanks again so much, Paula Glover, Ralph Izzo, for being here today. Stick around if you're at Propelify today. We've got a lot more coming up. We have Andrew Yang on the future of the planet. We're giving away $50,000 for this challenge. We have one-on-one investor speed dating and so much more. Again, Ralph, Paula, thanks for being here. Oh, before I forget, I almost forgot the most important part. If we were there in person, I'd make everybody stand up and high five their neighbor because it's a lot of fun. Since we're not there in person, we'll do it digitally. So on the count of three, 1, 2, 3, boom, high five your camera. We're there with you in spirit. Thanks so much for everything you're doing. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Great,